The metallic hum of the outpost's air filtration system was Darren Wells' constant companion. Stationed on the desolate planet of Chorus 7 to maintain mining equipment, his days were a monotonous cycle of repairs, solitude, and the occasional video call from home. Tonight was supposed to be no different. Darren leaned back in his chair, absently turning a worn wrench when the piercing shriek of an unauthorized breach alarm tore through the quiet. He shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. Grabbing the plasma cutter he used for repairs, Darren moved cautiously towards the control panel. The security feed displayed the external hatch gaping open, the lock overridden with unnatural ease. "No way," he muttered, tightening his grip on the tool. Uninvited guests were rare on this dead rock, and they never came bearing gifts. A soft, almost melodic voice stopped him in his tracks. "Human, reveal yourself." Though accented and slightly mechanical, the words carried a disconcerting weight of authority. Darren rounded the corner, his breath catching in his throat. In the dim corridor stood a figure unlike any he had ever encountered. She was tall, her skin a pale lavender with faint bioluminescent patterns that shimmered across her arms and face. Her eyes, like molten silver, glowed with an inner light, and her long, braided hair moved as if touched by an unseen current. She wore a dark, sleek outfit that seemed to flow and shift like liquid metal. Darren raised the plasma cutter instinctively, his voice tight. What are you?" The alien tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing. "You are Darren Wells, human male. This is your station." "That's, yeah, who's asking?" He held the plasma cutter raised, his pulse hammering in his ears. "I am Lyra," she stated, "and I require your assistance, immediately." Darren blinked, his apprehension morphing into confusion. "Assistance? You broke into my outpost." "You're lucky I haven't. I will consume you if you refuse," she interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact and chillingly cold. He froze. "You'll what?" Lyra frowned, as though her statement had not been received as intended. "Your energy, specifically. My kind requires it to survive when desperate." Darren took a step back, raising the plasma cutter higher. "Okay, hard nope, that's not happening." Her expression shifted to something that might have been exasperation. She took a slow, deliberate step closer. "Listen carefully, human. This atmosphere is tainted for me. Your filtration system must be modified so that I can breathe properly. If you refuse, I will take what I need directly from you." Darren's mind raced. This was surreal. But the desperation in her luminous eyes was undeniable. "Okay, wait," he said, lowering the plasma cutter slightly. "You're saying you're poisoned by the air here?" "Yes," she replied curtly. "Your planet's mining processes have released compounds incompatible with my biology. I underestimated the level of contamination." Darren exhaled sharply, still trying to grasp the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Fine, I'll help. But no energy consumption, got it?" Lyra's lips quirked upward, a hint of a smirk playing at their edges. "You have my word." Grumbling under his breath, Darren led her toward the central filtration unit. Lyra followed, her silence unnerving. As he worked, she observed him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You are more cooperative than I anticipated," she commented after a while. "Yeah, well, I'm not in the mood to be eaten," he retorted. "Why are you even here? Chorus 7 isn't exactly a hot vacation spot." Lyra paused, her silver eyes flickering slightly. "I am a scout. I was tasked with assessing potential alliances for my people. By breaking into my outpost and threatening to eat me," she stiffened, her voice cooling, "I miscalculated. Your assistance was not part of the original plan." Darren snorted. "Yeah, well, welcome to Earth's finest outpost. Population 1. You're stuck with me for now." Minutes ticked by in tense silence while Darren adjusted the filtration system, stealing the occasional glance at Lyra. She stood motionless, her features sharp and unreadable. When he finally finished, he straightened and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. "There. Modified to filter out whatever's bothering you. Should work fine." Lyra approached the unit and inhaled deeply, her bioluminescent patterns dimming slightly as she exhaled. "Acceptable," she said. "You have my gratitude, Darren Wells." He crossed his arms, still wary. "Yeah, sure, just don't make a habit of breaking into my place." She turned to him, her expression a blank slate. "Your assistance has ensured my survival. I will not harm you." "Great," he muttered, not entirely convinced. "So what now? You just hang out here until your mission's over?" Lyra's gaze shifted towards the outpost's darkened corridor. "For now, yes, but understand this, human. I am not here for your convenience. Do not interfere with my objectives." Darren rolled his eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it." As Lyra moved to explore the outpost, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a bizarre turn. And though he didn't trust her, not yet, he couldn't deny the spark of curiosity she ignited within him. Who was this alien, really? And what had he gotten himself into? Sleep was impossible. Every time Darren closed his eyes, Lyra's image returned. Her luminescent eyes narrowed, calculating whether or not she was done feigning her need for help. He groaned, tossing aside the thin blanket on his bunk and staring at the ceiling of the small, dimly lit room. He heard soft footsteps echoing in the metallic corridors, and his pulse quickened. Of course, she wouldn't quietly stay put like a normal guest. Normal guest. What was he even thinking? He swung his legs off the bed. If Lyra intended to wander his outpost like she owned it, he might as well keep an eye on her. The hum of the filtration system was louder near the common area. He found her there, standing before a reinforced viewport, her silhouette dark against the swirling dust storms of Chorus 7. Her hair appeared to glow faintly in the dim light. Darren cleared his throat to announce his presence. "You don't sleep, do you?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. Lyra didn't turn. "Sleep is inefficient. I regenerate energy through other means." "Right, the whole eating people's energy thing," Darren said, folding his arms. "Still not planning on that, I hope." She glanced at him over her shoulder, her silver eyes gleaming with a hint of amusement. "Not unless you provoke me." "Comforting," Darren muttered. He walked over to the viewport, his gaze shifting to the raging storm outside. "So, what is your mission? You said you're here to scout for alliances." "Alliances against who?" Lyra's expression hardened. "My people are at war. The coalition we face is vast and resource-rich. We must find allies to stand a chance." Darren frowned. "And you thought Earth would be a good bet. Hate to break it to you, but we're hardly spacefaring warriors. We're barely out of our own solar system." "Your kind is resourceful," Lyra replied, turning to face him. "Unpredictable. That is what makes you valuable. Valuable enough to threaten." Darren countered, raising an eyebrow. "You don't exactly make a great first impression." Lyra's gaze flickered down for a moment, a subtle chink in her otherwise impenetrable armor. Desperation can lead to regrettable actions. The admission caught Darren off guard. He studied her, noting the tension in her posture. "Desperation, huh? Sounds like your situation is worse than you're letting on." She hesitated, then turned back to the viewport. "The coalition is relentless. They seek not just to conquer, but to eradicate. My people have lost more than I can recount." Darren's first instinct was a sarcastic reply, but the weight in her voice stopped him. Instead, he sighed and leaned against the wall. "Look, I don't know what you expect from me. I'm just a maintenance guy. I fix broken systems, I patch leaks. That's my skill set, not alliance material." Lyra's silver gaze locked onto his, and for the first time her expression softened just a fraction. "You underestimate yourself." "Yeah, well, you don't know me," Darren said, though her words stirred something within him. "I know enough," Lyra replied. "When the air here poisoned me, you acted without delay. You found a solution. Adaptability is a strength your species excels at, even when you do not see it in yourself." Darren scratched the back of his neck, unsure how to respond to a compliment. "I mean, fixing things is my job. That doesn't make me some genius strategist." "Perhaps not," Lyra said, stepping closer. but survival often depends on the simplest acts of ingenuity. Never disregard that, he swallowed, suddenly aware of their proximity. Her presence was almost magnetic, her glowing patterns casting a faint light across his face. Darren coughed, stepping back. So what now? You just hang around until I prove how valuable I am. Lyra tilted her head, studying him as if he were some intricate puzzle. I will remain until my assessment is complete. Great, Darren muttered. Guess I'll add entertaining alien scouts to my resume. Her lips curved into a small smile, the first genuine one he had seen. You're amusing, human. Glad I could brighten your day, Darren said dryly. He gestured towards the corridor. Come on, if you're going to stick around, you might as well learn how this place works. Last thing I need is you breaking something important. Lyra followed without protest, her face an unreadable mask once more. As Darren led her through the outpost systems, he watched her closely. Despite the initial threats and the constant sense of danger she radiated, there was a vulnerability about her. She was not just a warrior or a scout. She carried the weight of her people's survival. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Darren felt an urge to help carry it. The hum of the main generator was a comforting background hum as Darren led Lyra through the cramped hallways. The systems were old, cobbled together from whatever parts had been available, but he took pride in their functionality. He pointed out the key areas, the filtration room, the communications array, the storage bay, but Lyra barely glanced at them. Her attention remained fixed on him, making his skin crawl. You're not paying attention, he said, glancing back. What if I'm explaining how to keep this place from blowing up? Lyra's silver eyes glimmered in the dim light. I would hear an explosion before it became a problem. That's hardly comforting. Darren stopped, facing her with folded arms. You need to know how to navigate this place if you're sticking around. What happens if I'm not around to hold your hand? She arched a brow, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. You assume I require guidance. Let me guess, Darren said, leaning against the wall. You've got some alien sixth sense that lets you magically understand every piece of human tech you come across. Lyra stepped closer, and Darren felt that strange pull again, as if her presence filled the space around him. It is not magic. It is experience. Your technology is rudimentary, but the principles are universal. Oh, I see, Darren said, smirking. We're the dumb primitives, is that it? I did not say that. Her tone was calm, but a faint challenge glinted in her eyes. You are resourceful, as I've said. It is an admirable trait. Darren blinked. It was the closest she'd come to a compliment since their meeting. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the mix of pride and discomfort. Well, resourcefulness only gets you so far if you don't know what you're doing. So how about you listen for once? Lyra tilted her head as if considering his words. To his surprise, she nodded. Very well. Show me. For the next hour, Darren led her through the systems, detailing each component and its role in keeping the outpost running. Lyra's questions were sharp, insightful, and showed that she was absorbing information much faster than he'd expected. It was unsettling. She wasn't just learning, she was analyzing, understanding every system's weaknesses and strengths. When they reached the generator room, Darren paused by the control panel, wiping grease off his hands. This is the heart of the operation. If anything happens to the generator, everything else goes down. Lyra studied the machinery with an intensity that made Darren uneasy. It is inefficient, vulnerable to failure. Yeah, well, it's not like I had a choice, Darren replied, bristling slightly. We work with what we've got out here. I did not mean it as criticism, Lyra said, turning to face him. Your ability to maintain such a system with limited resources is commendable. Darren stared at her, caught off guard. Thanks, I guess. She stepped closer, her gaze locking on his. You are not like the others I have observed. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his pulse quickening under her scrutiny. You adapt quickly, Lyra said, her voice quieter now. You find solutions even when the odds are against you. It is a trait my people value greatly. Darren shifted awkwardly, unused to praise, especially not from someone like her. Well, as I said, it's kind of my job. Lyra's gaze lingered for a moment before she turned away, her expression unreadable. I believe I have seen enough for tonight. As they left the generator room, Darren felt a shift between them. She remained dangerous, alien, but her presence carried a new layer, respect, maybe even a hint of trust, or as close to trust as she might offer. Back in the main corridor, a faint tremor stopped them both. Darren's stomach clenched. That wasn't the wind. Lyra's posture stiffened, her hand moving instinctively to the sleek device strapped to her side, a weapon. We are not alone. Darren swallowed hard, his mind racing. The outpost was supposed to be off the radar. If someone or something had found them, it wasn't an accident. What are we dealing with? He asked, his voice low. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, her expression cold and focused. Prepare yourself, human, they are here for me. And what does that mean for me? Darren asked, dreading the answer, her gaze softened just for a moment. If they capture me, you will not survive. Well, that's just fantastic, Darren muttered, grabbing a nearby wrench and trying to suppress the sheer terror he felt. Whatever was coming, he and Lyra were in it together now, whether he liked it or not. The metallic clang of boots echoed through the outpost, sending a shiver down Darren's spine. Whoever was approaching, they weren't trying to be subtle. Lyra stood beside him, rigid, her weapon drawn and humming with otherworldly energy. Darren gripped his wrench, cursing his limited options. So, what's the plan, genius? Or are we just improvising? Lyra's eyes never left the corridor ahead. You stay behind me. Do not engage unless you must. Oh, sure, Darren said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I'll just let the scary alien woman handle it while I stand here like a useless tool. Great plan. She gave him a quick glance. If you wish to survive, you will listen to me. Before Darren could argue, a figure emerged from the shadows. A towering creature clad in black armor, its helmet gleaming. It moved with a predatory grace, each step deliberate. Behind it, two more figures appeared, similarly armed. Darren's heart pounded in his chest. Friends of yours, they are hunters, Lyra said quietly, her voice laced with something akin to fear or anger. They've tracked me across systems. They won't stop until I am taken. Taken where? She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her weapon and fired. A pulse of brilliant blue energy streaked down the corridor, hitting the lead hunter directly. The impact sent it stumbling, but it quickly recovered, activating a shield around its body. Darren cursed under his breath. That's not good. The hunters advanced, their movements synchronized and precise. Darren ducked as one fired a blast of energy that scorched the wall inches from his head, the smell of burnt metal filling the air. Darren, move, Lyra yelled, pushing him as another blast tore through the space he'd just occupied. She returned fire, her movements fluid and calculated. For a moment, Darren watched, mesmerized as she danced through the chaos, each shot hitting its mark. But the hunters were relentless, forcing Lyra to retreat. Darren's mind raced. He couldn't just watch her fight alone. His eyes darted to the exposed wiring along the wall, the power conduits he'd cobbled together. An idea formed, reckless and probably suicidal, but it might buy time. Lyra! He shouted, scrambling to the control panel. Can you keep them busy? She didn't look at him, focused on the fight. What are you doing? Something resourceful, he muttered, ripping open the panel and yanking wires. Sparks flew as the generator faltered. He rewired the conduits quickly, his hands shaking as he worked. A hunter lunged, its blade whistling through the air. Lyra parried, the clash of energy sending shockwaves. Darren, do it faster. Almost there, he gritted out, twisting the last wire into place. The system hummed, a surge of power overloading the lights, which exploded in blinding sparks. The hunters hesitated, their visors flickering as the sudden light disrupted their sensors. Darren activated the emergency lockdown, thick metal doors sliding into place. Lyra pivoted, firing a last shot before darting towards him. Move, she barked, grabbing his arm and pulling him down the hall as the final door slammed shut. They stumbled into the control room, both breathing heavily. Darren leaned against the wall, wrench still in hand. That was insane. Lyra eyed him, her expression unreadable. You were reckless. Yeah, well, it worked, didn't it? He gestured to the sealed doors. That should hold them for a while. For a while, she repeated, her voice softer now. She stepped closer, her gaze meeting his. You surprised me, Darren. He raised an eyebrow. Thanks. You are not as helpless as I assumed, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Perhaps there is more to you than I thought. Darren felt a flush rise to his cheeks. Well, don't get used to it. I'm not a superhero. No, she said thoughtfully. But you are resourceful. He chuckled, a little amused. You keep saying that. It is a rare quality, she said, her gaze lingering. One that may be essential if we are to survive this. Her words settled over him. For the first time, Darren felt the gravity of their situation. Whatever Lyra was running from was bigger than anything he dealt with. Yet, as he looked at her, the warrior and her vulnerability mixing, he felt a strange resolve. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady. Together. Lyra's expression softened, a brief respite from the tension before the sound of metal groaning shattered the moment. Their reprieve was temporary. They are breaching the doors, Lyra stated sharply. We must prepare. Darren nodded, gripping his wrench. Then let's make them regret it. The metallic screech of the breached door sent a jolt through Darren. He glanced at Lyra, her face grim and determined. She adjusted her weapon. He swallowed, gripping his wrench despite knowing it was useless against energy weapons. Any bright ideas? He asked, his voice tight with nerves. Lyra tilted her head, listening to the approaching footsteps. Survive, she said flatly, then looked at him. Stay close but not too close. I need room to fight. Right. Close but not clingy. Got it. Before she could roll her eyes, the first hunter emerged, its helmet swiveling, the visor glowing faintly as it scanned the room. Darren had no idea what it saw, but the creature raised its weapon instantly. Move, Lyra barked, pushing him behind a console as the hunter fired. A beam of energy tore through the air where Darren had been, singeing his hair. Okay, new plan, Darren muttered, heart pounding. Let you handle this. Lyra darted forward, her movements fluid and fast. She fired, the blast hitting the hunter's shield with enough force to make it crackle. The creature countered with a swing of its blade, narrowly missing her as she twisted away. Darren peeked over the console, his mind racing. The room was a mess of damaged equipment and wires. There had to be something. He spotted a heavy-duty power core, its casing cracked and still faintly glowing. An idea sparked. Lyra, keep them busy, he yelled, scrambling toward the power core. She didn't respond, focused on dodging another hunter. Darren grabbed the core, grunting as he dragged it towards the nearest control panel. The plan was half-baked, but better than nothing. The third hunter burst through the breach, turning the odds against them. Lyra held her own, but Darren could see the strain in her. She couldn't keep going forever. He yanked open the panel and started rewiring, his hands shaking. The power core hummed, its energy output unstable. Darren glanced back as a hunter swung its blade towards Lyra's unprotected back. Lyra, duck, he yelled. She dropped instinctively, the blade missing. Darren felt relief and panic. The hunters were adapting. Almost there, he muttered, twisting the last wire. The system whined in protest, overloaded. Darren, Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. A hunter was charging, blade raised. He reacted barely in time, grabbing a metal rod and swinging wildly. It hit the hunter's arm, throwing off its aim but not stopping it. Darren stumbled back, the creature advancing. Then Lyra was there. A storm of motion, her weapon carving an arc of blue light. The hunter's shield shattered under the assault, and she sent it crashing to the ground with a final strike. Are you hurt? She asked, turning to him. No, but we will be if I don't finish this, Darren said, gesturing to the panel. Keep them off me for 30 more seconds. Lyra nodded and returned to the fight, unyielding. Darren focused, his fingers flying over the controls. The system teetered on the edge of a catastrophic overload. Come on, he muttered, his pulse racing. The power core's glow intensified, filling the room with an ominous hum. Darren, Lyra's voice snapped his attention. A hunter had her pinned against the wall, the blade close to her throat. The other advanced, weapon aimed at his chest. He made a split-second decision. "Lyra, get down," he shouted, slamming his hand onto the console. The system erupted in a blinding burst of energy. Darren flew backward, hitting the floor hard, the air knocked from his lungs. His ears rang as he struggled to orient himself. When the light faded, the room was eerily silent. The hunters lay motionless, their armor scorched. The power core was a melted husk. Darren groaned, sitting up. "Did it work?" he rasped. Lyra appeared in his blurred vision, her face streaked with soot but unharmed. She offered him a hand. "It worked," she said, her voice softer than ever. He took her hand, letting her pull him up. "You okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks to you." Darren managed a shaky smile. "Guess I'm not as useless as I look." Lyra's lips curved into a smile. "No, you are not." Silence lingered as they surveyed the wreckage. The scorched walls, the broken consoles, and the smoldering remains painted a grim picture. Darren's chest rose and fell as adrenaline faded and exhaustion set in. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm. "We need to move. Reinforcements will come," she said, her voice steady. Darren nodded, his legs like jelly. "Yeah, good idea. Lead the way." She stepped over the remains and motioned for him to follow. They moved quickly through the labyrinth of corridors, each step echoing. As they walked, Darren glanced at Lyra. The emergency lights highlighted her features, the determined jaw, and her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. For someone who said she might eat him, she was certainly intent on keeping him alive. "So," Darren whispered, "are we going to talk about the eating me thing? Or was that a cultural misunderstanding?" Lyra shot him a sideways glance. "You're still on about that. Kind of hard to forget when someone threatens cannibalism 5 minutes after meeting you." "I didn't threaten you," she said, her lips twitching. "I warned you." Darren gave a low, nervous laugh. "Yeah, huge difference." Their banter was cut short as Lyra raised a hand. She tilted her head, listening. Darren heard nothing beyond the facility's failing systems. "What is it?" he whispered. Lyra drew her weapon, her movements deliberate. "Something's here." Darren's blood ran cold. "Define something." A low growl echoed through the corridor, chilling him. Darren turned, his grip tightening on the wrench. A pair of glowing red eyes emerged from the shadows, followed by a hulking, quadrupedal form that looked like a nightmare. "What the hell is that?" Darren hissed. "A tracer beast," Lyra said grimly. "They track and eliminate fugitives, fast, strong, and relentless." "Fantastic," Darren muttered. "Any weaknesses?" "Not many," she admitted. "But they're not invincible." The beast snarled, its teeth glinting as it stalked closer. Darren panicked, his mind racing. He glanced around, looking for anything usable. The corridor was mostly bare. "Stay behind me," Lyra ordered, stepping in front. She raised her weapon. The beast lunged, its mass hurtling towards them. Lyra fired, hitting the creature directly. It yelped, but its momentum carried it forward. Darren barely reacted, ducking as the beast leaped over him, its claws raking the air. It landed with a thud, spinning to face them. "Okay, that didn't work," Darren said, his voice shaking. Lyra's expression hardened. "I need more time to charge another shot." The beast lunged again, and this time Darren acted on instinct, swinging his wrench. It connected, stunning the beast. "Go now." Lyra shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him down the corridor. They ran, the beast's growls echoing. "This is not how I saw my day going," Darren panted. Lyra didn't reply, focusing on their escape. She stopped in front of a sealed hatch, her fingers flying over the control panel. Darren saw the beast closing. Lyra, now would be a great time to work some magic." Almost there, she muttered. The hatch opened just wide enough for them to slip through. Go, she ordered, shoving him inside. Darren stumbled into the next room, watching as Lyra fired again, hitting the beast's leg and sending it crashing. Lyra dove through the hatch, slamming the close button as the beast's claws scraped against the metal. For a moment they were silent. Darren collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. Lyra leaned against the hatch, weapon in hand. Well, Darren said, that was horrifying. Lyra gave him a sidelong glance, smirking slightly. You handled yourself better than I expected. High praise coming from someone who saved my ass twice. She chuckled softly, unexpectedly warm. You're not entirely useless, Darren, just mostly. He grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds their heavy breathing and the facility's groans. Darren's hands trembled, but he managed a nervous smile as he leaned back. So, he said, are these tracer beasts normal, or am I just special? Lyra laughed quietly. You're definitely special, in all the worst ways. Darren snorted, shaking his head. I don't know if that's reassuring or insulting. Take it how you want, she replied, her tone lighter. But she turned serious, her violet eyes scanning for threats. We can't stay here, it will come after us. Tracers don't stop until their targets are dead. Darren's stomach dropped. Awesome, so how do we kill it, or get it off our backs permanently? Lyra hesitated. Killing it is hard. They're engineered to withstand anything, but not invincible. If we overload a power core and lure it into the blast. Whoa, Darren interrupted, holding up his hands. You're saying we blow up a power core? That sounds dangerous. It is, Lyra admitted, her voice firm. But it's our best option, unless you have a better idea. Darren opened his mouth, then closed it. Okay, power core explosion it is. Lead the way, Captain. Lyra smirked, pushing off the wall. Stay close and try not to trip. Hey, I only tripped once, Darren protested, following her. And that was because your friend, the death beast, tried to eat me. Excuses, Lyra muttered, teasing. As they moved, Darren noticed small shifts in Lyra's demeanor. Her movements were sharp, her focus intense, but there was an undercurrent of something softer, concern. For all her warrior instincts, she was a mystery. So, he said after a few minutes, is this normal for you? Fighting monsters, dodging death, teaming up with clueless humans. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, one brow raised. Clueless. You've been surprisingly resourceful. Wow. That almost sounded like a compliment. Don't get a swelled head, she said, though her mouth twitched. And no, this isn't normal. I usually work alone. Why's that? Darren asked. Lyra hesitated. Because relying on others can get you killed. Her words hung heavy, and Darren decided not to press further. He knew there was more to her story, but it wasn't the time. They rounded another corner and Lyra stopped. Ahead, a large chamber with towering machinery and glowing conduits. In the center, the power core, its energy pulsing. There it is, Lyra said, pointing. We need to overload it. Once it starts, we'll have 2 minutes to get clear. 2 minutes, Darren repeated, his voice rising slightly. That's not a lot of time. Then we'd better not waste it, Lyra replied, striding into the chamber. Darren followed, his nerves jangling. The sheer scale of the machinery was overwhelming. Lyra moved purposefully, her fingers flying over the control panels. Keep an eye out, she said, not looking up. If the tracer beast shows up, stall it, Darren asked. With what? Harsh language. Be creative, she shot back, focused on the console. Darren sighed, gripping his wrench tighter. He was not a hero, just an ordinary guy in an extraordinary mess. But he wasn't a quitter either. A growl echoed through the chamber, chilling him. Darren turned, his stomach clenching as the tracer beast emerged, its glowing red eyes locked on him. Lyra, Darren called out, his voice shaking. We've got company. I need 30 more seconds, she replied, her tone clipped. The beast lunged and Darren barely dodged. He swung his wrench, but the creature was too fast. Darren stumbled back, his mind racing. Okay, think, Darren, he muttered. His gaze landed on a sparking conduit and an idea sparked. He yanked it free, the wires crackling. "Hey, ugly!" he shouted, waving the conduit like a weapon. The tracer beast hesitated, sizing him up. Darren swung it and the creature snarled, lunging. This time he jabbed the live wires at its face. Sparks flew and it recoiled with a pained roar. "Got it," Lyra shouted. "Let's move." Darren dropped the conduit and bolted towards Lyra, who was already sprinting towards the exit. The tracer beast recovered, its growls louder as it chased them. "Run faster," Lyra yelled, grabbing his arm and dragging him along. "I'm trying," he gasped, his legs burning behind them. The power core hummed ominously, its glow intensifying. Darren didn't look back, focusing only on putting distance between them and the explosion. As they rounded a corner, the core detonated, the shockwave ripping through the facility, throwing them to the ground. For a moment it was chaos, noise, heat, and blinding light. Then silence. Darren groaned, pushing himself up, his body aching. His ears rang and his vision blurred, but he could see Lyra. She was already on her feet, brushing debris off her armor as if surviving explosions was routine. "Is it dead?" Darren rasped, his voice a whisper. Lyra offered him a hand, pulling him up. "If it isn't, it's not going to chase us anytime soon." He swayed on his feet. Lyra steadied him, her grip firm. "You're heavier than you look," she muttered, amusement in her tone. "Thanks for the morale boost," Darren said, trying for humor. "Where to now?" Lyra scanned their surroundings, noting the destroyed walls and wiring. The explosion had destabilized the facility. The walls groaned and the floor trembled. "We need to get out before the whole place collapses," she said urgently. "Can you run?" "Define run," Darren quipped, straightening. "I'll keep up, promise." She gave him an appraising look before nodding. "Follow me, and if you fall behind, I know, I'm on my own." "Noted." Lyra smirked and broke into a jog, her movements fluid. Darren followed as best as he could. The corridors were in shambles and the air was thick with smoke. As they ran, Darren reflected on everything that had happened. He'd gone from an ordinary life to this, running alongside a mysterious alien warrior, fighting beasts and blowing up a power core. "Lyra," he said, his voice strained, "can I just say, you're probably the most terrifying and amazing person I've ever met." Lyra glanced back, one brow raised. "Terrifying and amazing, interesting combination. Well, you saved my life." "Multiple times," Darren pointed out. "But you also threatened to eat me, so, yeah, the scales balance." She chuckled softly, almost lost in the chaos. "Fair enough, and you're not as useless as I thought you'd be." "Wow," Darren said, feigning offense. "Don't shower me with praise." Their banter was cut short by the ground shaking violently. Darren stumbled, managing to keep his footing. Lyra grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Move faster," she shouted over the noise. The structure's failing. Darren pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his legs and lungs. The exit was close. He could see the faint glow of natural light ahead. It was tantalizing, a beacon of hope in the midst of destruction. They burst out of the facility just as another explosion rocked the ground behind them. Darren collapsed onto the dirt, his chest heaving as he sucked in fresh air. Lyra remained standing, her gaze fixed on the facility as it crumbled, sending up smoke and debris. For a long moment, neither spoke. Darren lay there, staring up at the sky, while Lyra stood silently, her expression unreadable. "Well," Darren said finally, his voice hoarse but laced with humor, "that was something." Lyra turned to look at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You're still alive. That's something too." "Barely," Darren muttered, sitting up with a groan. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to keep up with you?" Lyra tilted her head, her violet eyes gleaming with amusement. "You're still breathing, aren't you?" "By some miracle," Darren replied, dragging himself to his feet. He wobbled and Lyra steadied him, her touch firm but gentle. "Come on," she said. "We're not out of danger yet." The hunters won't stop just because we took out their tracer. Darren sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Great, more fun times ahead. Lyra smirked, starting to walk away. Stick with me, Darren, you might actually survive this. He watched her for a moment before following. You know, you're kind of growing on me, he said, catching up. Don't get too attached, Lyra warned, though there was a hint of something softer in her tone. Darren chuckled. Too late. The sun hung low in the alien sky, its crimson hue casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. Darren trudged behind Lyra, each step a small victory against aching muscles and relentless fatigue. The remnants of the destroyed facility still smoldered in the distance, a grim reminder of their narrow escape. So, what now? Darren asked, his voice breaking the silence. He kicked a loose stone, watching it tumble. Do we just keep running until we keel over? Lyra glanced back, her expression unreadable. We need to reach the uplink station. It's the only place I can call for extraction. Extraction? Darren's eyebrows shot up. You had a backup plan this whole time. Always, Lyra replied, matter of fact. But it's not as simple as you think. The station is deep in neutral territory. Hunters patrol constantly. Of course they do, Darren muttered, adjusting his makeshift pack. Because why would anything be easy? Lyra smirked but didn't reply, leading the way up a rocky incline, her movements fluid despite the wear and tear. Darren marveled at her resilience. She seemed unshakable, an immovable force in the chaos of his life. Tell me something, Darren said after a while, desperate to distract himself. What's the deal with these hunters? Why are they after us? Lyra hesitated, gazing ahead. They're not after us, they're after you. Darren stopped, his stomach sinking. Me? What did I do? It's not about what you did, Lyra said, turning to face him. Her violet eyes glimmered with a mix of determination and pity. It's about what you are, Darren frowned, confused. Okay, you lost me. What am I? An anomaly, she said simply. You're human, but your biosignature has been altered. The hunters think you're a threat or a prize. Either way, they won't stop until they have you. Darren's mind reeled. Altered? How? By who? I don't know, Lyra admitted. But whatever was done to you, it's made you valuable, dangerous, maybe even both. Great, Darren muttered, running a hand through his hair. Just what I needed. Another reason to question my entire existence. Lyra stepped closer, her voice softening. I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone. I'll get you to safety, I promise. He looked at her, searching her face. There was no doubt. For all her sharp edges, Lyra's resolve was unwavering. Darren found himself believing her, even though he barely understood what was happening. Okay, he said finally, his voice steadying. Let's get to this uplink station. Lyra nodded and turned to continue, Darren following, his mind racing with unanswered questions. As the day wore on, the terrain grew treacherous. The rocky landscape gave way to a dense forest, its towering trees casting eerie shadows over their path. The air was thick with damp earth, and a faint metallic tang that set Darren's nerves on edge. This place gives me the creeps, he muttered, his eyes darting to every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs. Are we sure this is the right way? Positive, Lyra said without hesitation. Stay close, the forest is full of predators. Of course it is, Darren grumbled. Why wouldn't it be? Despite his sarcasm, he stayed close, his grip tightening on the metal pipe he'd salvaged. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He caught Lyra glancing back, as if assessing his readiness or his survival odds. They came to a small clearing, the sunlight barely piercing the canopy. Lyra held up a hand, signaling Darren to stop. She crouched low, her eyes scanning with focus. What is it? Darren whispered, his heart pounding. Lyra sniffed the air, her brow furrowing. We're not alone. Darren's blood ran cold. He tightened his grip on the pipe. Is it the hunters? Possibly, Lyra murmured. Stay quiet. Before Darren could respond, a low growl echoed through the trees. His breath caught as a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Then another, and another. They're circling us, Lyra said, her voice low and steady. She rose, drawing her weapon. Get ready. Darren's palms were slick with sweat as he adjusted his grip. The growls grew louder, more guttural. Suddenly, a creature leapt from the shadows, a sleek black predator with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It lunged at Lyra, but she sidestepped it, driving her blade into its side in one swift motion. Another creature charged, and Darren barely dodged its snapping jaws. He swung the pipe, connecting with the creature's head. It yelped, but another was already closing in. "Darren, behind you!" Lyra shouted. He spun as a third creature lunged, knocking him to the ground. He struggled against its snapping jaws, its foul breath making him gag. Just as its teeth were about to sink into his neck, Lyra's blade flashed and the creature collapsed, lifeless. Darren scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving. "Thanks." "Don't thank me yet," Lyra said, her eyes scanning the trees. "There are more coming." As if on cue, growls erupted around them. Darren tightened his grip on the pipe, his pulse racing. This wasn't just survival, it was a test of his strength, courage, and his ability to keep up with the warrior who'd saved his life. And he wasn't about to fail. The creatures circled, their glowing eyes reflecting the dim light. Darren felt adrenaline surge, his heart pounding as the pack closed in, hungry and relentless. Lyra's eyes flicked to him, sharp and calculating. "We can't fight them all. We need to move now." Before Darren could even process the order, she was in motion, slashing through the nearest predator. He barely reacted before she pulled him, her grip firm. "Keep up," she snapped, pulling him through the forest. "Don't look back, don't slow down." Darren's breath came in ragged gasps as he followed, the creature's growls echoing behind them. The ground was uneven, the rocks and roots threatening to trip him, but he pushed forward, adrenaline keeping him steady. "You think we can outrun them?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "They're fast," Lyra admitted, "but not faster than me. Keep going." The sound of paws pounding grew louder, closer. Darren saw a creature leaping from the shadows. Without thinking, he swung the pipe, the blow landing on the creature's skull. It stumbled, but more were coming faster. Lyra was a blur ahead, weaving through the trees with ease. Darren had no choice but to keep up, his legs burning, but he couldn't slow down now. Not when he saw the desperation in Lyra's eyes, the determination that had kept them alive this long. "Up ahead," Lyra shouted, pointing to a narrow passage between two massive rocks. "That's our escape." Darren pushed harder, his legs like lead. They reached the gap, and Lyra squeezed through first, sliding between the rocks. Darren followed, barely fitting, his chest scraping against the stone. They emerged into a small hollow surrounded by cliffs. For a moment they were hidden, the predators unable to follow through the narrow passage. Darren collapsed, his chest heaving. Lyra took a knee, weapon in hand, her eyes scanning for movement. "We have a few minutes to catch our breath, but we need to keep moving." Darren could barely catch his breath, sweat dripping down his face as he wiped his brow. "This is insane. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." "You're doing fine," Lyra said, her voice softening. "Better than I expected." Darren looked at her, surprised. "Better than you expected." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes betraying no hint of amusement. "You're holding your own. I didn't think you would last this long." He sat up, shaking his head. "I'm not exactly the warrior you are." "You don't have to be," Lyra said, her voice gentle. "You just have to be willing to fight, and you're doing that." Darren chuckled softly. "Well, I'm certainly fighting for my life." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're not out of danger yet. Stay sharp." Before he could respond, the ground trembled. A low rumble echoed through the hollow, growing louder. Darren's eyes widened. "What is that?" Lyra's expression darkened. "It's the hunters. They've called for reinforcements." Darren's stomach dropped. The rumble was closer, and he could hear the roar of engines. They weren't alone anymore. "We need to get out of here," Lyra said, standing, offering her hand. "Now," Darren took her hand, pulling himself up. "Lead the way." They ran once more, Lyra's pace unrelenting as the reinforcements grew louder. Darren felt the weight of the situation pressing down, but he couldn't let it overwhelm him. Not now. Not when they were so close to their goal. They reached the edge of the hollow and Lyra pointed to a ridge high above. That's where the uplink station is. It's close. Darren's breath caught. They were almost there. Almost free, but as they climbed, the reinforcements grew deafening. The rumble of engines reverberated and the trees shook. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she led the climb, her movements swift. Darren kept pace, his body aching, but he could see it now. The ridge ahead, the flicker of the uplink station's signal. "We can make it," he said, his voice steady. Lyra shot him a glance, her expression unreadable. "We don't have a choice." The reinforcements were closer now. Darren could hear the screeching engines, the pounding of footsteps and weapons powering up. They were running out of time. Then, just as they neared the top of the ridge, a sharp pain lanced through Darren's side. He staggered, gasping, feeling the warmth of blood soaking through his shirt. Lyra whirled around, her eyes wide. "Darren?" He managed a weak smile, though it was strained. "I'm fine. Just keep going." "No," she said firmly. "We're almost there. Hold on." She pulled him up, wrapping an arm around his waist to steady him. Together they climbed the final stretch, pushing through pain and exhaustion. When they reached the top, Darren's vision swam, but he saw it, the uplink station, a gleaming tower of metal and light against the horizon. It was their last hope. They reached the station's base, the towering structure looming above them like a beacon. Darren's head swam, each breath difficult, but the sight of the station gave him a final surge of energy. Lyra was beside him, her hand gripping his arm. "There's a terminal inside," she said, her voice strained but determined. "It's our only shot." Darren nodded, moving becoming increasingly difficult. His vision blurred, but he refused to stop. He couldn't. There was too much at stake. The sound of the approaching reinforcements grew, bringing them closer to doom. They had no time to waste. Lyra pulled him inside, her gaze flicking to the glowing console. It was the key to the uplink. She accessed the terminal quickly. Darren staggered against a wall, trying to steady himself. He pressed his hand to his side, the pain growing more intense. His strength was draining, but he couldn't collapse now. "We're almost there," Lyra said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Just a few more seconds." Darren heard the thundering footsteps outside, the voices of the reinforcements. His mind started to haze, but his resolve kept him grounded. He couldn't die here. With a final keystroke, Lyra turned to him. "It's done. The signal is sent." Darren's heart surged with relief, but it was fleeting. He felt the coldness of his body setting in. His legs buckled beneath him and he slid to the floor, his back against the cold metal wall. Lyra dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she checked his wound. "Darren, no, stay with me." "I'm here," he managed, his voice weak. "We did it, you got us out." Her eyes glistened with frustration and fear. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You can't." Darren smiled, a faint chuckle escaping him. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not on you," Lyra replied, her voice full of conviction. "Not on anyone I care about." He reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly. "Then you're not getting rid of me that easily." The sound of distant engines echoed louder now, but different, faint but unmistakable. Help was on the way. Lyra glanced at the door, then back at Darren, her expression softening. "You're stubborn, you know that," he managed a weak smile. "I've learned from the best." She chuckled softly, brushing hair from his forehead. "I'm not letting you die. Not when we've come this far." Darren's eyes fluttered, the pull of darkness threatening to overtake him. But he couldn't give in, not now. Not when they had just made it this far, and then he heard it. The roar of engines growing closer, the hum of a ship landing outside. It was the extraction team. They had made it. They were going to get out of here. Lyra's expression shifted, her body tense as she looked toward the door. "They're here," she said, her voice filled with relief. But even as the door began to open, Darren's vision was fading. Exhaustion, pain, blood loss, everything was catching up to him. He was slipping, his consciousness fading. Then, before the darkness consumed him, he felt it, a gentle touch on his cheek. Lyra's voice was the last thing he heard, soft and tender. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. And in the deepest part of his heart, Darren knew that he believed her. Want more thrilling adventures like this? Don't miss out. Subscribe now and join us for brand new stories every day. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next twist in the tale. We've got so much more to share.